Greetings, Minecrafters, and happy Friday. So, what I wanted to talk about was a recent experience with little Giovanni. You can see there that he's doing really well. He had an encounter with a porcupine. Actually, it happened twice, but we're not going to talk about the second one. That wasn't as big of a deal. We just didn't realize that they had kind of invaded the trail we go on. But the first one was really, really, really ugly. The poor little guy had an emergency vet visit. It was just nasty. And I've talked about it so much on the Stress Outlet. I don't want to belabor that here. But what I want to talk about here on this full-length podcast episode is the lesson in it. You know, porcupines are definitely... I got to thinking about this because, for me, inspiration, which means in spirit, right? For me, it comes from anywhere and everywhere. It can come from a rap song. It can come from, you know, people and talking and being out in the world. It can come from books. It can come from movies. It can come from porcupines. So I couldn't help but thinking, after we got through the urgency, yucky stuff of it, and G was on the mend, I thought, what's the message here? Because I've been doing a lot with boundary setting, ironically. Maybe not so ironically. I thought, wow, could there be a better example of boundary setting than a porcupine? And my answer is, I don't think so. Because, you know, Giovanni he's very, very, very gentle. But, of course, the porcupine doesn't know that. So he probably stuck his schnoz. I mean, I saw him. He wasn't very deep in the woods. So they must be right. It's hard to describe it. There's like a Y, and one trail goes this way, and one trail goes... And right in the middle of the Y, like in between your fingers, like that, I think is where they are. But anyway, he didn't even go deep back in there. And he went in without quills and came back completely in his mouth and his feet. It was awful. Anyway, I thought to myself, from the porcupine's perspective, right? He just wanted to play with her. But she didn't want to play with him. And that's okay. So the whole thing with this is, if somebody is sticking their schnozzy in your business or in your life, even if they mean well, we need to put up boundaries. And boundaries, of course, have a purpose, because without the walls, we're letting it all in. And it's overstimulating. It doesn't even mean... There's boundary setting for bad things and people who are toxic, of course, and all that's kind of like a no-brainer. But there's also just stimulation boundaries. Like, I've had enough today. Social battery low. Need to recharge. Or, you know, we could just spend all kinds of time talking about all the reasons to have boundaries. But the point is, they're necessary. And the best boundary setters, I know this from Brene Brown's work, tend to value themselves the most. Doesn't that make great sense? Yes, because we cannot take care of a self we don't value. And boundaries say, it's a language. In fact, I just interviewed, if you haven't seen that, I think I let it go, I really let it go, released it today. Jennifer Anderson, amazing, one of my mastermind friends, did a thing on boundaries. And what she said was, boundaries say, I value me, and I expect you to value me too. And that's a good message. And here's the other thing with this, is people respect strength. That is just the truth. We can tell ourselves whatever we want to. On the flip side of that is, people do not value weakness. It's just the truth. I mean, have you ever seen somebody, you know, walking around, their shoulders are low, and they're, you know, they kind of putting it out there. I'm not saying something legit didn't happen to them. That's kind of not what I'm really talking about. I'm talking more kind of an energetic thing where somebody's putting it out there that they, you know, have low self-esteem and they're boundaryless, saying, it's like saying, go ahead and walk on me, tattoo welcome on my forehead. You know, and that's not what we want. The opposite of that is somebody who's a really good boundary setter. And I think often what keeps people from setting boundaries is fear of people being pissed at them, right? I mean, that's what it is. You can fill in the words with different things, like, you know, you feel guilty, you know, whatever, fill in the blanks. But that's really what it is. It's all about being afraid, fear of people being upset with you. And here's the thing with boundary setting. The only people who are going to be pissed about you setting boundaries are the people who benefited from you not having them. That is a true statement. That's a true statement. And the other thing I'd like to add into this, because I'm getting going again with the podcast here. Once they changed, they messed around with the platform, it threw me. Anyway, I'm back. So nothing I wanted to really sort of add here is that, a couple things, just two more things. Largely, that's also about wanting to fit fear of not fitting in, which is way different than belonging. Fitting in has to do with wanting to be part of the group or accepted by the group, or just the person. It can be one person or more than one person, whatever. But we're willing to alter, change, compromise who we are, even if it's in some small way, to get the approval of that person or other people. So fitting in is about the ego. Caring what people think is about the ego. Versus belonging, which is, you know, the authentic self, not the ego. The ego and the authentic self are opposites. The ego is the evil twin of the authentic self. So the fitting in thing is the ego. I need all that external approval. I need all that external kudos, like me, approve of me. And that's what all that fear about the FOMO thing is, right? So belonging is the authentic self saying, here I am, bringing yourself to the table, bringing yourself into the room, and I don't give a fat rat's ass, you know, whether you like me or not. We know we're not saying all that. Somebody who's got that authentic charisma just owns the room. They don't even have to say it. And it's not arrogance. Arrogance is the ego. Authenticity just owns the room because of that authentic confidence, just the belief in oneself, that I'm bringing this to the table. If you don't like me, that's okay. It's all right. Do I care what you think? No, not really. Am I interested in what you think? Maybe, because it might be a differing opinion politically or differing opinion on an article you just read, and that's all exciting to have people have differing opinions. That's how we learn and grow. But the authentic person isn't walking around with that, oh no, what if they don't like me? What if they don't like my opinion? What if they don't like what I say? The authentic person doesn't give a fat rat's ass. It's just that here's what I believe. This is what you believe. Maybe it's a different perspective. Okay. But that's the huge difference between fitting in and belonging. And one of the big things that can get in the way of the boundary setting is those who are trying to fit in. Because those who belong can very easily, very naturally, very organically set boundaries because they value themselves. They have an inner knowing of their inherent value and their worthiness, which makes it very easy to set boundaries. And they don't have to worry about people being pissed because they don't care, for one. And also, it doesn't happen as much. Because if you've seen people out in the world, people just say, okay, this is good for me, that's good for me, that just isn't good for me. They don't get into explaining. They're not apologizing. They're just saying, yeah, I can do this and that, but not that. You know, it's just, whatever. They don't even explain. And people just stop in their tracks because they're not saying it with any kind of, you know, bad intention. It's just a this is how it is statement. And then it just sits and rests, and that's it, the end of the chapter. So it's very, very important. So when I had this porcupine, or actually more Giovanni had the experience, although I was involved with all the drama of it, taking him to the vet. Everybody was lovely. Thank goodness. They took him in the emergency. They were so good, and they gave him stuff so he didn't feel it and all that stuff. And now he's on the mend. But I had to think, there's something in this story with the porcupine that I had to share with all of you. And that's what it is think about how, because it's kind of the proof in the pudding, how necessary boundary setting is, because even non-human animals do it, right? So think about that. The porcupines do it naturally, and they don't have nearly, as far as we know, the advanced, you know, prefrontal cortex that we do. That's kind of what separates us from the non-human animals. And so I just wanted to share that with you. Porcupines are sort of the epitome of the boundary setters, and it's not only okay to set boundaries, it's necessary, because otherwise it's like just taking the walls off a castle. And it's just that you'd have way too much of whatever you don't want. You got to filter that stuff out. Even if it's not so deep, like we talked about the toxic thing, just the stimulation for your social battery, they're only 24 hours in a day, right? As far as last anybody checked. And we've got to put some boundaries up if we're going to survive. And I don't just mean survive like survive. I mean thrive. You know, really, spend our life minutes like they're cash. If you're going to do that, you got to have boundaries, because having boundaries sets a budget on your life minutes, because people have to be worthy of your life minutes. That is the whole point. All right, so that was a good message. I'm just super stoked about my porcupine story. Okay, have a fantastic weekend. Happy Friday.